part of that. And the other thing that ends up being really effective is we're now shifting towards teaching science through the technical name is phenomenon-based learning. It actually started in Finland, became really big in Scandinavia, and that has now sort of taken over the world in terms of pedagogy. But basically, it taps into the fact that we're storytellers. We love stories. It's how we learn. It's how we pass down our cultural understandings, our family records, our favorite sports teams, whatever it is, from stories from generation to generation, long before we had anything written down. And so tap into that, take advantage of that. Tell stories that are engaging. And it is remarkable how much better students retain that when they're actually engaged. So the basic idea is you give them some interesting problem, and then you have them ask the questions. And then it's like, well, that's a very good question. And then you let them do an activity that addresses that. And then that leads to more questions. And if there's a question that's not a direction you want to go, you can just say, well, that's a good question, but hold on to that for a while. You know, and you end up spiraling through all your content. And they never say, why are we learning this? They know why they're learning, because they ask the questions. And it's remarkably effective. So if I can take a couple minutes, let me give you an example of a story about it, right? So how many people here were born in Missouri? Okay, about half the people here. Do you know when Missouri became a state?
1821.
Ooh, wow. How do you know that?
I was born here.
Wow. All right. Yes, indeed. All right, so this story involves when Missouri became a state, and also when its first big cemetery was built, which is Bellefontaine Cemetery, which was built in 1849. And it's also related to the eruption of a volcano, right? So I've got some of your attention now. So like, what's going on here? Well, it turns out, back in 1815, Mount Tambora erupted. This is the largest volcanic eruption in the last 200 years. Right? For scale, Mount St. Helens erupted about 1 cubic kilometer of volcanic ash and dust in the atmosphere. One. This was 100. So this is 100 Mount St. Helens. All right. This little island out in the middle of Indonesia, right? But it ejected also a lot of sulfur dioxide. Now I'm giving you kind of a dense plot here, but this is a plot done by the Smithsonian Institution of the sulfur dioxide ejections from volcanoes from the current 2000 back 1,000 years ago to the year 1000. And this is places largely on the Ring of Fire around the Pacific where these happen. But this one right here in 1815 is Tambora. More than 100 million tons of sulfur dioxide. And what's important about the sulfur dioxide is when it goes in the atmosphere, it reacts with water and carbon dioxide to make sulfuric acid. And so you've got these tiny little droplets, about 1/10 of a micrometer in size, which happens to be just the right size to block out sunlight. And here's a plot of incoming sunlight, solar radiation transmitted, and here's Pinatubo that happened in the Philippines back in 1991. Here's El Chichon, and you can see that the sunlight dropped about 10% following those volcanoes. And you block out the sunlight, and the global temperatures drop about 1/2 degree to 1 degree for about a year. Have a really big volcano, the temperature drops considerably, and 1816 was known as the year without a summer. Now, that's not quite correct. There was still a summer. But it snowed in New England in June and July and August. And in fact, it was so cold that towns in New England actually gave up. The town of Granby, Vermont, disincorporated. It's like, that's it, we're out of here. Packed up everything into wagons and headed west. I mean, it was literally freezing. Cold rains, crops failed, and people were starving. And you know, what would normally cause someone to take whatever belongings they have, throw them in some wooden wagon and head west into lands that already had people living on them that didn't want you to go there. Okay? You'll do it if you're starving. Now, Thomas Jefferson had done the Louisiana Purchase back in 1803. And so there was all this land west of the Mississippi, but nobody really was paying any attention. And I know this because from studying the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811, 1812, a decade later, there were still only about 5,000 people here in St. Louis. It's a small, basically a fur trading outpost, okay? But not after this. So you had a total disruption. You know, normally the warm, humid air that would come up from the Gulf got displaced by cold Arctic air that came through. Incidentally, also greatly changed whole patterns in Europe. Western Europe was several degrees colder that summer. The rains increased. In fact, the flooding was so bad, the very first meteorological associations were created in most of Europe. You may know the story Frankenstein. Frankenstein was written that summer by Mary Shelley. She was on vacation in Switzerland. It rained all summer. It was cold. She and her lover, Lord Byron, who was married to somebody else, sat in and wrote horror stories, and she wrote Frankenstein. He actually wrote the first English vampire story that their other friend with them, John Polidori, ended up flushing out into the vampire. Anyway, huge westward expansion. And Indiana becomes a state in 1816, Illinois in 1818, and Missouri 1821 as that sort of caravan of wagons heads west, driven by this volcano in Indonesia. So where does the cemetery come in? Well, it turns out cholera had been endemic to the Ganges Delta for ages. Okay, but had never successfully spread beyond that, fortunately. Well, the flooding was so severe. And remember, the Ganges Delta here today, you have 150 million people living in one river delta. That's how fertile this land is, but also how flat it is. And so massive flooding here. People are hungry, so they're more susceptible to disease. And cholera spreads out. It goes through Indonesia. Severe change to the weather patterns here. It goes through Africa, the Middle East. It stalls out for a while, but there's a second cholera pandemic that brings that through Western Europe. They didn't have cruise ships back then, but they had clipper ships, and the sail ships came across the Atlantic, came to the North and South America, hit New Orleans, came up the Mississippi River, and hit St. Louis and killed 4,000 people, about 5% of the population. And so the same volcano that caused people to move to Missouri was then killing them 30 years later from the effects of this pandemic of cholera driven by the same climate change. Right? So, okay, a couple lessons here. First of all, that's a lot more interesting way to present, volcanoes and pandemics. Bless you. It puts it in an engaging story that is also relevant to the people who live here in St. Louis. But it also shows how delicate the climate system is. We have greatly benefited by one of the most warm, stable periods in our planet's climate. And even then, we've had times, the climate change from the transition from the medieval warm period to the Little Ice Age, within 100 years, from the year 1300 to 1400, killed 70% of Western Europeans from a combination of famine and plague. And that would be like, that table survives and the rest of you are gone, right? We have no concept psychically of death at that scale. World Trade Towers, you had 4,000 people die. Look what it did to America's psyche. The Hurricane Katrina had 1,800 people die. Totally changed our concept. This would be like 200 million Americans die. And we don't have the concept of that. So this new way of teaching science, I will just say, has now been adopted by 20 states and adapted by 25 more, including Missouri. So that ends up being about 37% of students in the adopting states, 35% of students in adapted, another 8% are in the process. So that's 80%, 4/5 of American students will be learning climate science in high school and learning it in an engaged, hands-on activity way. The new way of teaching science also integrates the sort of engineering design mindset, which is really key. I teach a course every year, the fundamentals of energy, at Washington University, across all the schools. And I have students from engineering, business, art and architecture, and arts and sciences. And every year I ask them, how optimistic are you about your future? Now, that result over the last 15 years has gotten steadily, and I'd say, 1 being, like 10 being a utopia, everything's fabulous, and 1 being, Hunger Games or Maze Runner, or any one of the dystopian novels that the kids read nowadays. And the number has shifted more pessimistic over time. I mean, I have students now saying, I will never have kids. Why would I bring children into a world that's going to collapse? In general, the arts and science students, the science students are about a 4.5, the humanities students are about a 3.5, the business students are about a 5, and always have been, but it seems like they don't really think about it much. The art students are like 1s and 2s, we're hosed, we're 2. The engineers are like 8s and 9s. And I'm like, and I was like, so why do you think that? It's like, oh, we'll figure it out. It's a challenge, a problem. Tell us, what the problem is. We'll design a solution. So that sort of mentality of like, for kids, like, yeah, let's think about how to solve these. Is incredibly powerful, and so the whole way of teaching this from kindergarten onward incorporates this engineering design process. Things like the whole design of renewable energy that you talked about, right? So here's a question: how much of the year's worth of sunlight do you think we would need to meet all of those human energy needs? 30%, so that would be like 3 months or so, or something. A little bit more. Any other guesses?
I was going to say 3 months too, I think.
Well, we use 20 terawatts, right? We did that earlier. That's 20 trillion apples lifted 1 meter a second. Earth receives 173,000 terawatts. You divide that, that's an hour. We need just 1 hour's worth of sunlight to provide all the energy that humans need in a year. So this energy is one of the few areas where things actually look quite rosy, because we don't need to squeeze every little bit of every sunbeam out. We just need to tap into a small amount of it to meet our energy needs. The other thing that's key, though, is getting students to feel, and this is, I have a quote here from a very wise Buddhist teacher. All right, maybe he wasn't a Buddhist teacher, but he should have been, could have been. Building compassion. Let me read you this quote. And I actually wrote it up because it's too long for me to remember accurately. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. right? Could have been a Buddhist. How do you do this? How do you do this with kids? So you talked, there were comments earlier about there's no such thing as the self, being selfless. And this is something actually that science teaches us in a very powerful way. Like, from a scientific point of view, the concept of an I or a me has no meaning, either in space or time, right? During the time that we've been here, we've all been exhaling and inhaling, and we're now all part of each other. And if you put your hand on the table, you've touched enzymes from previous people who've sat at that table. They've been absorbed through your skin. They're now part of you. Their bacteria are now part of you, and bacteria shed DNA. They are part, they come into your genome. As was pointed out, we're walking colonies of organisms. You have thousands of species of bacteria in your digestive system. You couldn't eat your food without it. You have hundreds of species on your skin. For some reason we don't understand, women have about twice as many species of bacteria on their skin as men. It affects your personal smell. When you smell someone, your partner, your lover, whatever, you're actually smelling their bacteria, their whole suite of bacteria. There are 40 to 80 species of fungi in your toenails. There are whole species of mites that live in your eyebrows. And you need them to eat the dead skin there. There are 10 times as many microbes of other organisms in your body than there actually are cells of your body. So what are you? There's no I, there's no single me. You are part of you are a walking colony of life. And of course, we breathe, every time you breathe in and out, you breathe so many atoms in that statistically you breathe in at least one atom, one molecule that has been exhaled by every human being that's ever lived on the planet. So there's Gautama Buddha, there's Lao Tzu, there's Catherine the Great, there's Joe the Caveman, whatever, everybody, every moment. And of course, we're just borrowing these atoms for moments out of this 4.5 billion year experiment with life, at least 3.5 billion years of it. And this riding this crest, 99.99% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. And far more than that, every individual is died. And you've borrowed those atoms just for a brief moment. And then it's going to go on, that wave will pass, go past us. So that's just this sort of remarkable nature of being part of it. And as you mentioned, we're all related to each other anyway, right? We share 97% of our genes with what was a baboon.
Right.
We share 80% of our genes with a mushroom. If you eat a salad, you're committing cannibalism. These are your relatives. And I know that extinctions are natural. Because we've gone through these massive periods, usually driven actually by meteor impacts, where 50 to 90% of all species have gone extinct in a fairly short amount of time. But that allows for a whole new explosion of different forms of life to evolve. When I read that another tiger species has gone extinct, right? I have this visceral response to that. It's like a finger's been cut off for me. Right? This is the only thing that looks like this in the whole universe, and this is my family. These are my people, and this is science has given me this sense of connection, and I think it can be very powerful for children in that process of expanding their spheres. And I have to say, bless you, we have gone in that direction from the few people closest in our little cave clan the city-states and the nations, and now people are worried about the animals of the whole planet. There are even people who are worried about contaminating other planets with our NASA missions. So that sphere of compassion has actually left the Earth now and is incorporating our neighbor planets. So we're moving in the right direction. And sometimes we take a couple steps forward and one step back, you know. But I very much see that this connection with the world, our atoms, our genes, our bodies, the students can learn through science, can help build that sense of compassion that comes about through Buddhism and, well, in most of the world's religions. So, anyway, I'm sorry I ran over my time, but I wanted to give that message. Answer any questions that you might have.
Actually,
Sure.
So I feel like we've gotten really good at identifying the problem. and we know, I mean, we can see the science. That message is I think, very clear to as we see it. You know, how can we maybe look at the message in terms of, you know, that solution, in terms of, you know, because it's like when you're riding a bike and you see a rock that's coming right, there's no way you just see it, and so your attention focuses on that rock. You're like, I need to avoid that rock. I don't want to run over that rock. But the more you focus on it, the more likely you're going to be to go right over it and probably fall off your bike. So it's like, how can we switch our focus from being so focused on the problem and the issue to what is that solution? How can we look past the problem to see what that solution is so we can start moving in that direction?
Really good question. I think from a scientific point of view in the curriculum, one thing that I think is very powerful is we are moving away from the categorization of things, which used to be a big part of science, which really emphasizes the separation of things. Like, this is a baboon, this is a chimpanzee, this is a human, we're all separate, to focusing on systems. And I didn't get into it, but one whole dimension, the new science has 3 dimensions. There's the practices of science, there's the content of science, and then there are these big picture themes, and they are dominated by system thinking. So looking at things from a whole perspective. What's the flow of energy? What's the cycling of matter? How does this operate over big time scales, big spatial scales? So we are very much emphasizing with this new national way of teaching science to get students to stop focusing on the one thing, or if they do, because sometimes it is important to solve a particular solution, to understand that every solution that we do creates another problem. When you have 7.5 billion people, there is no silver bullet here. Every solution that we take is going to impact the systems in a multitude of other ways, and we simply need to be constantly balancing what our impacts are. You cover the world with wind turbines. That creates some challenges for migratory bats and other. I mean, you have to make trade-offs, and to do that, you have to look at the whole system as a whole. So to the degree that science can help, and its framework, its ability to address that has bounds and is limited, I think we're making great strides. So that's an excellent question.
Would you see me before you leave? Because we are in St. Louis, very practically. We are into our 6th or 7th year of becoming a city of compassion. And we are joining a global movement. It's a stealth movement. It's very under the radar. And we already have a base of over 100 people. So if you want to be part of that base, if you want this region to follow the Charter of Compassion that was written by 7 religious leaders under the guidance of Karen Armstrong back in 2008, 2007, and 2008. See me. I have information I can give you, and if you would like to sign on as part of that base, see me about that too.
So next up, we'll have our next speaker will be Venerable Jay Huang, who is the director of Wysession Temple here in Wysession. She was ordained in Taiwan many years ago before accepting the position to lead this temple. And she's been involved in many outreach programs, especially programs for children. How appropriate. And her topic today is crisis and opportunities. Venerable.
So I'm the last one, and I thought that I will speak for a longer time, but it seems that it is time is running out, but it's okay. So my topic is crisis and opportunity, and I would like to share my experience, my personal experience of making my my journey of the environmental awareness. Okay, so here. So when I was in middle school, okay, I was assigned to be a recycling team leader. Okay, so I'm the leader. And how many members in the team? Only one. Okay. So there are 50 classmates in the class. So I'm in charge of that duty. Okay, so I set some bucket at the back of the classrooms, and then of course there are signs: metal, plastics, glass, and paper. Okay, so it was happening. This was decades ago, so we were kind of like very proud that when I was in high school, I was already in a recycling project. Okay. So, but a cruel fact that I found out, people did not take care of. People didn't read. They don't take good care of when they throw their trash. Right? Whatever it is necessary, they just throw it in, and that's it. Okay? So you can see a plastic bottle in a metal bucket, or a glass bottles in the paper. So that time I was kind of angry, okay, and even blown off. So that is my my pain of learning the environment, how I can raise the awareness.